Leland Forbes Samson Bonham, well known as a master politician and was an outstanding statesman. He was a great leader and our hero, you understand. That's why we remember Leland Forbes Bonham.
Yes, once again, morning to you, my viewers. I'm here with you once again today. This is the fourth Sunday of the month, and I'm your host, Clayton Hines, the State of the Nation, a program sponsored by the Forbes Bonham Foundation. And today we would like to say up front, we want to say thanks to those persons who have supported us on the brunch and the concert, which was held at the Theatre Guild recently by the foundation. We have been able to break even, and I think that was all as a result of the support that we got from the members of the public. Those are two of our annual activities, and once again I want to say thanks to our supporters, those persons who have been with us over the years. And also we want to say happy birthday to the late Nelson Mandela. Of course, we'll be talking around about him this morning while we will be going through this program. And of course, I'll give you, the members of the public, to have an opportunity to make your contribution towards this very noble son of the world, we can say that, from South Africa. His contribution to the liberation struggle. With me in the studio today is none other than the chairman of the foundation, Mr. Vincent Alexander. And at this point, of course, I know the chairman, he was very pleased with the support we got from the members of the public in relation to the brunch that was held, as well as the concert at the Theatre Guild under the umbrella of the Forbes Bonham Foundation. And I want to invite him at this point to say what he has to say to the public in relation to the support we got.
Oh yes, Clayton, good morning to the viewers. We have had our annual concert. It's a bit late this year. It was held in March, unlike other years, and it was held earlier. And our annual brunch, which is normally held on CARICOM Day. And we would like to express our thanks to the public who supported those activities. And more specifically, to express our thanks to the Yoruba singers who came on board this year as the resident band for the concert, and all of those artists who contributed to making the concert a success. It was this year, it has always been. We're also appreciative of those who came out for the brunch, which is now an annual event, which provides a lot of opportunity for chit and chat among Guyanese, a lot of political talk. And special thanks to Tasty Dish, which for the second year has been the host of the brunch.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander. There you have it. And I want to come right away into the man Nelson Mandela and the liberation struggle of South Africa and the world. Nelson Mandela, what an individual. Been in prison for a long period of time. Of course, he has served his people with distinction, represented them well. I would like to hear your thoughts on Nelson Mandela and the liberation struggle.
Thank you very much, Clayton. Well, on the 18th of this month, that's last Wednesday, we acknowledged and celebrated the 100th birthday, some people would say Earth Day, of the late Nelson Mandela, who had been 100 years that he lived. Nelson Mandela has become an icon, and in fact is considered by many to be the icon of the 20th century because of the contribution that he's made to human development and to humanity. On one hand, Nelson Mandela made a significant contribution and gave significant leadership, along with his colleagues, in particular Oliver Tambo, to the struggle in South Africa and to the removal of apartheid as the regime of that country to a country which is now a democratic society. His contribution started when he was a relatively young person. He started off a peaceful struggle for the liberation of his brothers and sisters from apartheid. When that peaceful struggle seemed not to be successful, they upped the tempo by engaging in armed struggle. Now, it's interesting that the way in which the ANC conducted this armed struggle. We know of many instances, even in present times, where people are conducting armed struggle and they're doing so to the peril of the civilians. Mandela was, and ANC was very careful that in the course of their armed struggle, they targeted not civilian population, not populated areas, but they sought to target isolated installations, military installations, and other state bodies in an attempt to get the message over. But they were very, very careful, very, very humane in what they were doing in the struggle. As a consequence of Mandela's involvement in the struggle, he was taken prisoner and in fact spent 27 years in prison. I think it's important to note the way in which Mandela treated the court trial. When taken to court and charged, Mandela did not in any way deny what he was doing. What in fact he did do was to accuse the regime of not being a legitimate regime and therefore one that had absolutely no authority to bring charges against him, one against which he brought charges during the course of the trial. Very similar to what Fidel Castro did when he was charged in that famous trial now referred to as history. His speech to that trial now referred to as History Without Sodomy, where they made the point that one is not obligated to follow law which is policy oriented, which is man-made, if that law was unjust, unfair, and oppressive. Mm-hmm. And so Mandela said, well, you're charging me because you have unjust, unfair, and oppressive laws, an oppressive system. And I'm rebelling against that system, and I reserve the right to rebel against that system. But that notwithstanding, he was in prison for 27 years.
I want to come in at this point because I try as much as possible to be very educative on this program, and you've used two words which I think our young people will need to perhaps understand. One, the term liberation, and two, the system of apartheid. Now, persons who have read about Nelson Mandela, persons who have heard him, perhaps does not really understand what he was up against in terms of the use of this word liberation and the system. I would like you to address those two issues. One, liberation. Two, apartheid. What is it that he was up against in relation to this particular...
Thank you very much. In the first instance, we're talking about South Africa, a country which the British in the first instance sought to colonize. South Africa, in a sense, is a country of many nations, a number of different tribes that literally had their own governmental structures and had fought a war to maintain their originality, to maintain their independence, to maintain their own system of government. But eventually the Afrikaners, not the British, but largely Europeans from Holland, imposed upon South Africa a regime of apartheid, meaning that what they did, they took control, governmental control of the country, and imposed a system of segregation, treating the African people as second-class citizens. They were not allowed to go into certain parts of the country. In fact, there was a pass system for them to move from one part of the country to another. They had to have a pass. They were not allowed into certain jobs. They were not allowed into the political regime of the country. They weren't the ones who voted for the government of the day. And so what happened was a white regime under the pretext of racism, a superiority of white over black, who imposed themselves on the people of South Africa. And literally, one wouldn't say they were enslaved because they were paid for the work they do, but literally took away all the rights and the freedoms of those people to enjoy movement, to enjoy association, to enjoy the land and the wealth of the country, as they, the whites, gave unto themselves the right to better education, to better facilities for leisure, and segregation, very much like something that happened in early America. Blacks couldn't go to the same restaurants, blacks couldn't live in the same communities, blacks couldn't benefit from higher education, they couldn't go to the same schools. They were treated as inferior people.
Couldn't vote.
And as a consequence of that treatment and inferiority, were not allowed the human privileges that they were entitled to. In that context, liberation really meant the blacks being able, the Africans being able to assert themselves and to come into their own as the people who would exercise sovereignty through, in the first instance, having the right to elect their government, and having a government that would ensure that they benefited from the basic human rights, the right of association, the right to employment, the right to leisure, all the basic human rights that they were being denied.
Excellent, that coming up against that kind of system.
Right. So when one talks about liberation, one is really talking about the struggle for the attainment of human status, in a sense, in South Africa, for the attainment of human rights, and for the opportunity for them to exercise those rights in relation to their country, a country which in fact they are the indigenous people of. Interesting to note is that this question of liberation was not restricted to South Africa. In adjacent contiguous countries, Mozambique, Angola, there are also problems of liberation and domination under a system of colonialism, where Angola, for example, was controlled by the Portuguese, and they literally refused the people of Angola their independence, and they too had to embark on a struggle for independence, for liberation. Mozambique had similar consequences. Zimbabwe, once referred to as Rhodesia, had similar circumstances. So the struggle in Africa for liberation was not restricted to South Africa, but South Africa had this peculiar system of apartheid with a large white presence and domination and segregation that had to be fought against. And so Mandela gave leadership through the ANC to the struggle for the liberation of people from that imposition of a regime, an oppressive regime, an apartheid regime. And as a consequence of that, he was imprisoned and spent 27 years in prison. What's important to note is that for the 27 years that he spent in prison, it did not cause the struggle to wane. The people of South Africa, under the leadership of the ANC, continued their struggle. And in that continued struggle, they got support from what in Africa was referred to as the frontline states. And in fact, what they did, a lot of the people from the military arm of the ANC found themselves overseas, living in camps where they were trained and then penetrated the borders of South Africa to carry out the various attacks. And as I said earlier, this was done very carefully to ensure that there was no damage, no injury to civilians. So you had the frontline states that were very supportive. Tanzania being one of the major frontline states, Zambia being another frontline state. Those were countries that were independent at the time. Beyond South Africa and beyond Africa, you also had support from other countries. And Little Guyana has to be counted among the countries that gave sterling support to the struggle in South Africa, as much as it gave support to the struggle for the liberation of all the countries that were colonized in Africa, in particular Mozambique, in particular Angola and Zimbabwe. To the extent that we gave material support, we were very, very active on the international scene in the call for liberation and in the struggle for liberation, very, very active in the United Nations, and in fact headed a number of committees in the United Nations, particularly in relation to Namibia, another country that was suffering. Guyana was extremely active in that struggle for the liberation of Africa, and in fact gave material contributions. I think at one time it was 50,000 US that we gave to the struggle, the liberation forces in southern Africa. So that one could say that under the leadership of Forbes Burnham, Guyana was extremely active, and in some regards paid a price for its activism, because initially Western countries did not recognize South Africa's need for liberation, and in fact the apartheid regime was an ally to these countries. And it is not until ANC had done significant struggle internally, and ANC had done significant work across the globe, that these countries came to realization that there was in fact an illegal and oppressive regime that needed to be changed. And it got to the point where the United Nations recognized the need for that change, and all of that became a part of the pressure that eventually caused de Klerk to enter into negotiations. But at the core of all of that was the action of the African people themselves in South Africa. Demonstrative of Guyana's support for the struggle was the way we treated cricket. South Africa had a very strong all-white cricket team, and in South Africa blacks could not be involved. That's one of the things they were excluded from. Whether it was cricket or rugby, they were excluded. And so what Guyana did in the first instance was to declare they would not have, in fact internationally, it was determined that the South African team would be excluded from playing cricket against other nations because of the system of apartheid, and that team itself was representative of apartheid in terms of its composition. And Guyana went even further to ensure that anyone who in fact went to South Africa and gave support to apartheid in sports would not be supported, would not be given an opportunity to play in Guyana. And that had consequences not only for South Africans. When the English team came here to play, and that team included persons who played in South Africa, the team was not allowed to play in Guyana. We paid the price for that. There were Guyanese who themselves ended up, Colin Croft for one, going to South Africa, and that was the end of his involvement of cricket at the level of Guyana and the level of the West Indies. That was the level of sincerity and earnesty with which we embraced our brothers and sisters in the struggle for the liberation of Southern Africa. And as we talk today, we're speaking specifically about South Africa. So Guyana was integrally involved, and no doubt that is one of the reasons why I referred to Mandela earlier as an icon of the 20th century, and one of the reasons why Burnham would have been declared the Caribbean, the man of the Caribbean for the 20th century as well, because of his involvement not only in Guyana and its development, but his involvement in world affairs and his principled stand that would have led to our own hardship. One, I don't think Ren ever forgets the fact, Jilks, that he could not participate in the Olympics a year when he was undoubtedly going to be the winner of the 200 meters and probably the 100 meter. Couldn't participate because Guyana did not participate in that games as a part of its solidarity with the people of South Africa. Mm-hmm. So we were really committed and paid our own price. And it's important that people, young people today, understand that much of what we suffered in those days was a consequence of our principled stand in relation to human rights, ensuring that people, wherever they were recognized as human beings, and that regimes were established to give them the rights that human beings should be able to exercise.
I must say that was a good piece. I think your expose in relation to liberation struggle, apartheid system, has been very informative, and I want to shift that gear a little bit here, because the imposition, enslavement of the African people on the continent of Africa, the imposition in relation to what happened in the frontline states, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa per se, as we're discussing today, these things that have affected development of Africa, the states within that continent, and the need for Africans around the world that form part of this struggle to free themselves have led to a lot of states, not just in South Africa, but a lot of states in the Caribbean itself, moving into area of emancipation. Emancipation in relation to the black people freeing themselves from enslavement in these various states. Because this imposition, this advantage, this thing has been happening all the time. I want to move from what has been happening with Nelson Mandela to this whole idea of emancipation of the black in the Caribbean.
Well, I think this is very timely for us to engage in that, because on the 1st of August, we will be celebrating emancipation once again. Now, what we need to understand is the way in which the colonizers and the imperialists operated. On one hand, they went to Africa and sought to enslave Africans and brought them to what they call the New World, where they carried out a process of conquest and established regimes as an extension of their kingdoms, regimes where they exploited the people whom they enslaved. But not only did they go to Africa and sought to bring Africans into slavery in the New World, so to speak, but they also eventually colonized Africa itself. And so you had the presence in Africa of the British as colonizers, the French as colonizers, the Portuguese as colonizers. Those were the main ones. You did have also Spanish and Belgian presence. In fact, it struck me as I watched the World Cup to watch the Belgian team and the French team and the amount of Africans who were in those teams, and the irony of the history of the relationship of Belgium and Africa. For example, we know that Belgium was responsible for the death
slaughter
of Patrice Lumumba.
Not only, and the slaughter of a lot of Africans from the Congo, in Belgium. That's a record that has not been challenged anyway in the international media.
And there you had Belgium, pretending on the World Cup, the contribution from those people whose ancestors they were disrespected in the most awful way one could think of. Anyway, so that what I'm saying is that there was this process of, on one hand, enslaving, on the other hand, conquering the so-called New World and imposing regimes of slavery in those countries, and even worse than the situation in South Africa, because what they had was slavery. People had absolutely no freedom. They were treated as chattel, as property. And like in South Africa, a struggle ensued from the very inception. From the very inception, nobody volunteered to be enslaved in the first instance. They were captured, they were physically mangled and brought across the transatlantic. Some of them manifest their struggle even on those ships. And they were shackled to ensure they couldn't, carry out struggle across the transatlantic. Some of them committed suicide as a form of preferring to die than to be enslaved. And so, as they were enslaved, the process of struggle never stopped. The process of the anti-slave movement, never stopped. And so there were all of these rebellions across the New World against slavery, rebellions by slaves themselves. And we know here in Guyana of the Coffee Slave Rebellion in 1763 that occurred. We know of the level of success of that slave rebellion. We know the impact it will have eventually on freedom. So there's always been this quest, this desire for the people who were enslaved to return to the original state of humanity and freedom. And eventually, after decades and centuries of struggle, we saw what happened in 1834, that freedom was attained. I don't want to use the word freedom was granted. They struggled for and attained the freedom, but the freedom that was attained meant that there was no longer a system of slavery. But it did not mean that there was no longer a system of exploitation. However, emancipation is associated with that moment when slavery came to an end, when slavery was brought to an end. And so we have ever thereafter celebrated this moment and taken that moment of celebration to make, to reflect on where we actually are, and to the fact that in fact exploitation has continued, exploitation at the level of the individual and workers, the capitalists and workers, so to speak, exploitation at the level of country and country has continued, and so in fact the struggle has continued. Now, in that sense, we have to contextualize what happened in a place like Guyana, where 1763, in a sense, the struggle started for liberation, and we came right through until in 1966 we got independence. Now, I want to tie something here with South Africa in its present state and our own situation, and in fact lessons to be learned. Yes, we got independence in 1966, and yes, South Africa became a free nation in recent times. This struggle brings with it expectations, but in all of these societies, you have social strata or classes. And so, in some regards, the struggle for liberation and emancipation takes on a national character. Everyone in the nation seems to be involved in the struggle. But, as I said, there are people of different social strata. We know that even during the period of enslavement, there were what we call house slaves, and they were field slaves, and there was an attempt to differentiate between these people, give them different privileges. And so when this process of emancipation matures and you no longer have slavery or you no longer have apartheid, then there is a manifestation of a new dynamic. That now there is an emergent struggle among the classes or the strata in the society. And so one does not necessarily immediately see the complete liberation process where the ordinary people, the real people who are the workers, take control of their society. Sometimes control is arrested by a local, a national exploitative class. And so very often people complain that, we're independent but we know better off and things like that. And there isn't a clear understanding that the struggle in a sense has stages, and that once one attains national liberation, so to speak, the liberation of the individual, of the worker, is still not complete, because national liberation does not necessarily remove an exploitative system where even within the country you now have exploitation of one class by the other. And so that is the talk now in South Africa, that we no longer have apartheid, but the blacks are not necessarily better off. But I think one has to accept that the blacks are now in a position to pursue another stage of struggle. They were not in that position all the time. There was imposition, domination by literally a foreign force, so to speak. That has been gotten rid of, and it's a matter of taking the struggle to another level. That is pertinent not only to South Africa, it's pertinent to Guyana. And so even as we pursue this celebration of liberation, a celebration of emancipation, there's a recognition that ultimate emancipation, where we achieve equality, where there is
cohesion,
a system that treats all people as being equal, has still not been attained, and that this is a struggle that is both internal in terms of the various strata and the various outlooks to life, and international in terms of how countries relate to each other. But in all of that, how countries relate to each other and how we relate internally, it is based on the existence of a class system. And so, getting back to South Africa, one of the issues that they are faced with is the question of, is it a black and white struggle, or is it a class struggle? And some people seem to think that it is a black and white struggle, but really it is a class struggle, because in some regards there are people who are white who are not necessarily of the exploitative class. There are people who are colored who are not of that class. So one has to be able to focus on the material reality that it is not necessarily an ethnic struggle, and that ethnicity and race were used by a class to impose themselves, and that class was prepared to exploit anyone else, but it was strategic for them to use race. And now that apartheid has been dismantled, it is no longer merely the use of race, it's now rawly a class struggle, with some people of both races being involved in that.
Both groups, yeah. Now, I want to,
from a class perspective.
That's a mouthful. I think you have addressed that subject of liberation and emancipation. Now, today, I want to inform our viewers that the lines are now open for you to make your contribution to this discussion. I think we are looking at the 100th the birth anniversary of Nelson Mandela, his contribution towards the liberation struggle, and in essence the wider world, what influence that had on countries around the world and groups that were struggling to free themselves from not only enslavement but being from the imposition. I think
if we're going to open the lines, we need to put the number up on the screen
Yeah, I would just
so callers can
like to
see
ask
the number.
the operator whether they can assist us in making sure that the number is on the screen so that viewers can call in to make their contribution towards this program. I was reading quite recently the reason for the different languages in the continent of Africa, and you addressed that issue when you said not just enslaving the Africans, but they colonized the entire kind of continent as a result. You have a lot of these kind of countries speaking different languages on the continent
Different
of Africa.
European languages.
That even the European language themselves being spoken in these countries. Now, when you go back in time, you would realize that all that has contributed to this divisive approach that was taken in terms of kind of development, not just in the Caribbean, but in Africa itself, where they put these people who are speaking different languages, having been colonized by these people, to fight against each other. And it still go on.
Yes, well, a part of the process of colonization was balkanization. In Africa, you had nations, and these nations were synonymous with territory. What colonization did was to go in there and to draw lines which divided nations, and so you'll find that one nation found itself, let's take for example, a part of a tribe or a part of a nation found itself in one colony, and the same nation and tribe, another part found itself in another colony. So that a lot of the boundaries that came into existence were not natural boundaries, they were artificial boundaries created by the colonizers as they sought to divide up Africa
And enslave them.
for their domination.
The lines are. Morning on there, sir.
Yes, good morning, Comrade Cleveland Hans, and good morning to you, Comrade Vincent Alexander.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's an interesting discourse you're having pertaining to the great late Mandela.
Watch your television, sir. Just turn it down a little bit. I'm getting it.
You know, what's interesting is the fact that I listened to President Obama, who had a special invitation to deliver the feature address in South Africa in remembrance of Mr. Mandela. And you know, he said not one word of negativism. In fact, what he said, in summary, is that South Africa has come a very long way. Because when you look at South Africa, you have to look at South Africa in the context of slavery, which was a necessary evil. And without slavery, where would the world have been today? Secondly, you also look at South Africa in the context of F.W. de Klerk, whose institution of follow-through from slavery has to be dismantled in Africa so that they can see themselves for the freedom that they were working toward. And then you have to also look at South Africa and its own leadership. The great Minister Idi Amin, General Amin. And when you look at what happened in Africa, Mandela was making a more profound statement to his own countrymen, his own regional people in Africa, about what freedom is and they need to provide for themselves so that they can be provided for. South Africa today has one of the world's largest stadiums where President Obama spoke, ex-President Obama spoke. And that meant a lot in terms of how the people have liberated themselves, not essentially from the violent struggle, because that was sort of engineered in consequence of what was taking place at the time.
All right.
But look at the benefits. And therefore, at this point of time, in making that discourse to any people, whether it's the regional people in the Caribbean or elsewhere in the world, we have to now look at things from a point of view of positivism.
Yes.
Because we're going to dampen the emotions and enthusiasm of all people anywhere that listens to these kinds of discourse from the negative side in terms of their enthusiasm for elevation of their own lives. And that's where the message that our president is sending to the people. It doesn't matter what slavery was in terms of recognition. It matters more now as to how we can take responsibility for ourselves and elevate our thinking to the point of getting out of mental slavery and moving forward on a positive agenda for the benefit of the generations to come.
Thank you very much, Arnold. Yes.
And I hope that the same pattern of speech will not take effect on the campaign trail, because this element of discussing racial voting and all those kind of biased considerations has to be removed from our perspectives. And we must see ourselves in the light of a forward-thinking people with a clear objective of political struggle being just to change and change in an amicable way, so that the resources of this world and this nation, in particular Guyana, can be better utilized for the benefit of all.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So Good night to you, gentlemen. I hope to see you soon at some point in time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Talking.
But you're going to the you're going to the cricket today?
Goodbye, David.
You're going to the cricket?
All right, I think there's an important point we need to make that has not yet been made. It's the impact of Mandela on the world. Obama was invited and as the main speaker at a very large rally. I think 15,000 people were in attendance for the 100th anniversary of Mandela's birth. And Obama seemed to have a relationship with Mandela, which he himself speaks to in the foreword to a book called The Conversations of Mandela. And in that foreword, Obama makes the point that as a young college student, he was exposed to information on Mandela and the struggle in South Africa, and that exposure influenced his own development, his own outlook to humanity. And at that time, South Africa was not recognized by the United States. And we have seen that transformation where a country not recognized by the United States got to the point where its president embraced South Africa, and more particularly embraced Mandela, and made the point that he, an American, was influenced in terms of his personal development and growth by the struggles of Mandela and the struggles of South Africa. So we see in the impact of this man called Mandela, it's not restricted. He has impacted the world stage and has impacted developments. And so one sees Obama's presidency as a part of the struggle, international struggle for the recognition of African people. So, you know, he's a part of that continuum. Now, I mentioned the recognition of African people, and that brings us to the point that the world itself has come to recognize what African people have been subjected to. And as a consequence of that, the United Nations declared a decade under the title Recognition, Justice and Development. So they have said, United Nations, which means the world at large, all countries have come to say, look, these people have suffered. These people have been disadvantaged. And the time has come when the world should create an environment where these people can have an opportunity of redress for what has happened to them over the centuries. And so we're now in that decade of international decade for
the people of African descent.
Under the theme Recognition, Justice and Development. And it's now for the countries, the governments, and the people themselves to take advantage of this decade as a period of redress, a period of equalization, a period of coming into their own on the world stage and in their various countries.
Which is very, 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 very important, because I think that decade comes to an end in 2024.
Yeah.
2024, the decade for the people of African descent comes to an end in the year 2024. So it's very important in relation to what Arnold said and your point, that people should take cognizance of this opportunity that has presented itself for countries like ours and other states.
And one should not disassociate the decade from South Africa, because in a sense, the struggle for recognition of the need for a decade came to a height at a conference held in South Africa that looked at this question of xenophobia and racism. So South Africa has now played a very critical role, in fact, in bringing
that to the fore.
The state of African people throughout the world and the need. And it's out of this conference in South Africa that we move towards the United Nations itself declaring this decade. So as we celebrate Mandela, there's much more than Mandela to be celebrated. We have to celebrate all that has taken place recently in terms of recognition of what has happened to African peoples in Africa and in the diaspora, and not only recognition, but the movement to redress the ill that has visited us over the decades. And it's for us in some regards now to take up that mantle and to move this struggle to the next stage.
Yes, viewers, our lines are still open. I know in a few days' time. Yeah, you're on here?
Yes, good morning. I was here all the time like this.
Yeah, morning, sir.
Morning to you, Mr. Alexander.
Good morning.
Yes.
Very, very, very much happy and appetizing program this morning. Contribution 1. Why, after all this separation that Africa been through and the suffering of black people and the struggle of coffee towards the freedom of black people in this country, and the contribution that Barnum has made towards the struggle, the freedom for black people recognizing throughout the world, a day like today in Guyana, a country which one of the founding leaders, Mr. Barnum, who has fought so hard and struggled so hard for the freedom of black people and the right and recognition of black people throughout the world, is not being highlighted in this country as the teaching black people what our black people have faced in this country because of Barnum and his efforts made towards the struggle with black people in the country.
A very good question. I think you're quite on target there. I think we need to have more education program in relation to informing our people as to what we went through, because remember, we were a colonized state. And like Mr. Alexander pointed out, being a colonized state, you were subject to all these vagaries and imposition by the colonizer. And obviously, for us becoming independent, there had to be a struggle in terms of emancipating ourselves from all these various ills and imposition.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And your next point is?
and the next point is that if, since recognizing such, our president decided that we can open this country now as a no change for our people, but they haven't opened anything for black people to understand themselves and know themselves and recognize themselves and know who they are and decide to take up a challenge towards our struggle for betterment in life. Thank you.
All right, thanks for calling. But I think I want to perhaps disagree with the last comment, because the leader has made it very clear. He has made it open to all African organizations and quasi-organizations to bind themselves together and come up with a program that can gain the attention of the state to see what contribution the state can make in relation to whatever program they have come up with to address the concerns of the African person in this country. I think
Yes, it's important that
you're part of that establishment or team, I think.
in the case of Guyana, in this decade, the government of Guyana has been proactive in some regards. The president called upon the African community to come together and to work together in this decade to achieve the objectives of the decade, which are recognition, justice, and development. As a consequence of that, a country coordinated mechanism has been put in place. It's referred to as IPADG, International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly Guyana, which seeks to bring together all of the African organizations and for us collectively to come up with a program and to relate to government in relation to what we think the state should be doing in redress, because the world has recognized the need for this. And what we are doing in Guyana has been described by some, in fact, as a model, because nowhere else in the Caribbean has a government done what this government has done, and nowhere else in the Caribbean have we gotten to the point where we have a country coordinating mechanism. Now that mechanism is in a sense in its early stages. We have just established our secretariat, and we are challenged to come up with a program. We have articulated that we will be working in 3 areas. The area of policy, to make sure that herein the country has policies that are
To address the interests of people of
to
African
address the
descent.
interests and to redress the disadvantage that we have suffered, and that we also want to look at programs, and people may ask what you mean by programs. For example, we feel strongly that the reintroduction of history should be done in our schools, so our children could know about our history. How do you get recognized if you don't know who you are? And
on
in
that
that
score,
history, to emphasize the role that African Guyanese have played in making Guyana the country it is. I was at a book launch of the works of Professor McGowan, and there was a young lady at that book launch who works at Guyana Enterprise, making the point that reading what Professor McGowan said brought to her consciousness of the role of the African Guyanese in terms of the development and making Guyana a place that could be populated in a civil way by people. The canals that we dug, the making this place habitable,
the revetment
right?
works.
All the works. So that lends on one hand to a recognition of people for the role they have played, to the understanding of their humanity, and so we must have in our schools, our history must be taught.
I have advocated on this program before and other programs that I was on, that is not just teaching history, which in some instances address the kind of Caribbean history. I advocated for us to teach Guyanese history. And I have even said that because people have different views in terms of what our history is like, we have said on this program that there need to be a team of people to address the structure and the kind of parameters within which this history of Guyana need to be addressed, and what the issues that need to be addressed, so that it can be accepted by all. Because if one group go on the right of history, you're going to find people saying and criticizing. So that also need. I see the line that's going. Morning, on here.
Good morning. I have a question for Mr. Vincent Alexander.
Yes, sir.
I would like to know if in Constituency 12, if you see the PNC bringing forward the PNC party ideology, or if they support any group that has the PNC ideology. Thank you.
Let me get a question again. But you're going on there?
All right, he's asking if in Constituency 12, if I see. I'm not going to respond to that question. I don't think that this is the forum for us to be
We're not discussing those issues
PNC
today.
and what they're doing in a particular constituency. What I would say is that we recognize that the government, of which the PNC is an integral and major part, has come to the point where they have recognized the need for them to be proactive in relation to the decade, and that is a good thing, and that we are prepared to work with the government. And I don't know if he's a PNC person or not, but things should happen from two levels, from the government level and from the ground level. And if
The community level.
If he is one of the constituency 12 persons in the PNC, he should be advocating at that level, not only for the government to do things, but for the people to recognize the need to be involved in what's happening.
Morning, on here.
My brothers,
Morning, my friend.
Morning.
better manners.
Yes.
Now, this decade entails recognition, justice, and development.
Mm-hmm.
Recognition got to be slavery. The only justice we will get is political rights. And development is grants, scholarships, etc., etc. Am I wrong to make the statement?
No, but if you listen to what Ms. Alexander said, there is a body that will be addressing the African interests on three fronts. I think three fronts you said. Yeah. So if it is that there is any African group, individual, who would like to benefit in relation to the programs that are being administered, then you should try to make contact or get to be part of this kind of discussion to hear how you or your group can benefit in relation to what is being proposed for the state to address.
Yeah, well, that's why I want a clarification now, because slavery got to be recognition. All the infrastructure we did to make the country have a developed kind of that said. The only justice you could get for this political rights as a down payment in addition to other payments.
Let me see if I get you correctly.
Well, we have to be integral in the political system, and it has to be a system that does not put us at a disadvantage to anyone else.
Well, the current system don't get me at disadvantage.
So that has to be addressed.
Yes, that has to be addressed.
Of
That has to
course,
be
yes.
Yeah, well, as I understand, we go can't just what I'm trying to be honest.
All right, my friend.
I try the best, my brother.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's very. Now we were looking. Emancipation Day is kind of fast approaching, and of course the Forbes Burnham Foundation will once again be part of whatever is taking place on Emancipation Day at the National Park. I know this year that once again we will be involved out there to perhaps display what we have. We have some little booklets that we normally sell very cheap. We go for $100 and $200. We don't pass those things when you gotta get kind of material from us, and we try to encourage our young black people to read more. It's very important. So people know on the phone and television all the time. People hardly read now. I see one education officer was saying that there's need for our young people to now read plenty, and you're not getting that.
But what I want to say is this year the Burnham Foundation wants to venture out a bit. We have essentially been participating in Georgetown, but Georgetown is not Guyana. And so this year we're looking forward to the opportunity to go to Region 6, where we told there's going to be what is referred to as a mega event. And so we want to take the war to Region 6. Because a part of the liberation, a part of the emancipation process has to do with the ideas of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, whose ideas of self-reliance, of self-sufficiency, of feed, house and clothe yourself, and all of those ideas
Cooperativism, that's a very critical.
Cooperativism are critical to this process of emancipation. So our role in this process is sharing these ideas and trying to get people on board in terms of realization of those ideas. And this year, we want to take ourselves into Berbice, to the
This may well be
ancient county.
our last call. Morning on here.
Yes, Mr. Alexander. Burnham message needs to go to every four corner of this country. Every village, every county, every community, every constituency. Burnham message needs to be taught. Just imagine, I got a 14-year-old girl going to school, and she don't know nothing about Mr. Burnham and nothing about his teaching and his culture. And when she comes home, sometimes she says, "Oh, Daddy, well, Mr. Burnham, what does Mr. Burnham has contributed to this country?" And I got to sit down and go back in school at 4 years of age to enlighten her on the contribution and struggle that Mr. Burnham has made for this country.
That's good, but you're doing a good job.
The fact of the matter is our education system has failed us in terms of the development of Guyanese as a conscious people about their own being. And the time has come for us to confront this failure and to ensure the education system redresses the question of Guyanese knowing of themselves, about themselves, for themselves.
I think just for the benefit of the callers, well, we have a website for young people who are now very, very quick to on the phone to get information. We have our website where you can go to. We try in a very small way to provide information on Forbes Burnham and the things that he has done. So if they can, those who are skillful and have those kind of fancy phone, not like the ones I have my Mango Pelter, which then they can go there and go to the website of
Our
the
website address is lfsburnham.org.
lfsburnham.org.
And there's information there that could be useful.
Yeah. I'll
As
take
well as
one
we have-
more
we
call
have a Facebook page as well.
before I close this program. Morning, you're on the air. Morning.
Tell me, man, again, brother.
Yes.
I have a scheme document to put to Mr. Burnham website.
You have a document to go on the website.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll be glad to see it. I'll share it with the
Alright, well, I'll get one to you soon.
general public out there. Thank you very much.
Alright, brother.
And your last few words before I close here, Vincent.
Well, I think that moments like these, birthdays, birth anniversaries like Mandela's and so, should be used for us to introspect, for us to reflect, and for us to acquire momentum in the process of emancipation. We have come a long way, but there's so much more to be done. And it can only be done if we have the knowledge and the commitment and acquire the resources. And that should be our focus. Getting the knowledge, making sure we're committed, getting the resources, and making demands of the state to play the role that the state ought to play in this process.
Yeah, with that, I want to say thanks to our viewers, those of you who have allowed us in your living rooms and kitchen and downstairs, wherever you are, in the yard, listening to this program. I want to say thank you very much, and we will be back with you again. If you're not part of our exhibition for Emancipation Day, I'll be back with you on the 4th Sunday in the month of August when we bring to you another program under the umbrella of the Forbes Burnham Foundation called the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Clayton Hines, saying thank you and good morning.